Hi everybody and welcome back. Today we're going to talk about a group of theories called Anomie or strain theories. Anomie and strain can be used interchangeably as far as theories, and we'll talk more specifically in a couple slides as to exactly what that means. So when discussing anomie and strain theories, there is a lot in common in these theories with social disorganization. Again, it is a macro level theory, not necessarily a micro level theory, and it cares about things like social order, stability, and integration and how they help with conformity. And the basic kind of proposition is that disorder causes crime. It also looks at social systems, right? So we look at this internal consensus on norms and values, strong cohesion, and social interactions that are orderly social interactions within these social systems. But there is a separation between social disorganization and anomie. Social disorganization suggests that crime happens as a result of disorder and rapid change that weakens control of members of communities causing crime. If the community is weakened, then crime will happen. Anomie, however, suggests that malintegration weakens morals that hold the laws to society, but crime will not happen unless access to economic resources is blocked. So social disorganization, if you recall, had this issue with it where there were a lot of people living in socially disorganized areas that weren't actually criminal, that don't commit crimes. Anomie theory is trying to fix that problem by basically suggesting the reason those people are not committing crimes is because they still have access to some semblance of economic resources. Now, we're not talking necessarily about hundreds of thousands of dollars, but they still have a good job, even if it's kind of an unskilled job, low-wage job. They still have a job. They still have some sort of economic resources. Anomie theory suggests once that access to resources is blocked, once we chop off that ability to actually make money, that's when real crime happens, and that's when struggles happen. So the anomic structure is said to produce strain on members of the community, and crime is simply just a symptom of that strain, right? And so and that's why it's called anomie theory or strain theory. When there's strain, when people experience this strain, they might act out in a bunch of different ways. They might get more angry. They might turn to substance abuse, or they might commit crime. Social disorganization is focused on neighborhoods or local communities, whereas anomie is focused on broader societies as a whole. So, for example, the reason Chicago's crime rates are higher than St. Augustine's crime rates, according to an anomic or a strain theorist, is because access to economic resources has been cut off to a large group of people in Chicago, whereas here in St. Augustine, we actually are having the opposite problem. We have more jobs than we can actually fill here. And that's a different problem. Is if you wanted a job, if you wanted to live a good life, you could go out and get 2 or 3 jobs right now, today, in St. Augustine and not even worry about it. That's not true in Chicago, according to anomie or strain theorists. So Merton had a theory of social structure and anomie that was based pretty heavily on the work of Emil Durkheim, right? And this is Durkheim is one of the founders of sociology. If you've taken intro to sociology or even social law and stuff, you should be very, very familiar with Durkheim. He's, again, one of the biggest names in sociology that there is, and he coined this term anomie. And anomie refers to a state of normlessness or a lack of social regulation that leads to deviant behavior. Specifically, Durkheim was interested in behaviors like suicide, and studied and spent a lot of his time focused on suicide. But Merton said, wait a minute, let's not just talk about suicide here, let's apply this to crime. And so he integrated, or an integrated society maintains this balance between social structure and culture, right? There's this nice symbiotic relationship between social structure and culture, or approved social means and approved goals. Anomie is what happens when means and ends do not align. And so if you think about it in general, what are some of the ends in American society that we strive to, right? Everyone strives to be wealthy, right? A lot of the reasons why you guys are in college right now is probably because your parents taught you need to go to college if you want to get a good job and be wealthy. If you want to be able to afford to live in St. Augustine or buy a house on the beach or something like that, you need to get a good job, and the best way to get a good job is to go to college, right? Well, aren't there other ways that you can get wealthy without going to college? Certainly there are, right? And in fact, the show Dirty Jobs with Mike Rowe was a whole show based on the idea that you don't need to go to college to be wealthy. There's a lot of really good blue-collar jobs that you could work and become very, very wealthy. However, we also see movies like The Wolf of Wall Street and The Godfather and Scarface and stuff that show us that, well, there are some unconventional ways to get wealthy also. They're just not socially approved ways. And that's when Anomie is there. It's, I need to get wealthy, but I don't have the resources or the ability to get wealthy in the quote-unquote approved ways. And Merton suggests that American society kind of pushes this means-ends disjuncture in two big ways. One is there's a very, very strong cultural emphasis on success goals that is not equally matched with a strong emphasis on socially approved means to achieve these goals. So, for example, in fact, just recently, my wife was at a bachelorette party just recently, and there was a guy at a bar who pulled out a wad of money from his pockets, and she said he must have had easily $3,000 or $4,000 right there. He had to have been super wealthy. And I even said to her, I said, it's really interesting that that's how you view this, and it kind of made me think of this Anomie or strain theory, right? So we have this idea that if I am carrying around $3,000 or $4,000 in my pocket, I am wealthy. Everyone around me sees that I'm wealthy. However, and this is what I said to my wife, I said, yeah, but Taylor, you don't know if that's his entire net worth in his pocket right now. So he might not actually be that wealthy. He just wants everyone to think he's wealthy. And so we have this emphasis on the goals, right? Oh, wow, look at that guy. He just drove by in a Maserati, right? He just drove by in a Lamborghini. He must be wealthy. Well, we don't know if he stole that car or not, and most of us in society don't care if he stole that car or if he stole money from his work to get that car or anything else, right? Because all American society really cares about is the outward showings of success, not showing all the hard work. In fact, if you watch a lot of TV shows, I know Bill Gates got in a little bit of trouble back in the 90s because the two biggest shows on television in the early 90s were Seinfeld and Friends. And he made a speech one time that said, you have to actually leave the coffee shop and work if you want to be successful in American society. And everyone were big Seinfeld and Friends watchers, and they both pretty much took place around either the apartment or the coffee shop, and it upset a lot of people in America, saying, whoa, 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 these are our favorite shows, how dare you, right? The American dream is taught in schools, even in poor communities, and yet, what is the American dream? If you work hard or hard enough, you'll be rich, right? And that sounds really good, and we even tell you that at Flagler. We tell you that in school. Work hard and you will be successful. The problem with that, though, is what? If you're not successful, it's because you're not working hard, right? It also suggests it doesn't matter what you're working hard at, as long as you're working hard, that's good enough, right? And so, and this is actually something that I've seen with students for semesters. Ever since I've started teaching, I've had students come to my office and say, I can't figure out why I failed this exam. I studied really hard for it. Like, okay, that's fine. What did you study? Well, I studied chapters 1 to 5. Okay, well, the exam was on chapter 6 to 10, so you didn't study the right thing. Well, that doesn't matter. I should still get at least some credit for this exam because I studied really hard. I worked really hard. It's like, yeah, but you didn't work hard at the right things, right? The American dream, as it's taught, especially, is not taught in that way. Now, imagine you're in a poor community, right? And you hear your teacher saying, if you don't want to be poor, you have to work hard, right? If you work hard, you won't be poor. And then they go home and to a poor household and a poor lifestyle. What are we teaching these kids about their parents and about their communities in general? These are all just a bunch of lazy people in these communities. Is that true? Most of the time not. In fact, at Flagler's campus, with the exception of the administration, faculty are probably some of the highest paid people on Flagler's campus, right? Compared to the groundskeepers and custodians and stuff, right? I promise you those groundskeepers and custodians work a whole lot harder than most faculty do, right? It's just, you get compensated differently for different skill sets, right? And so there's not really there's this issue in American society where we have this American dream idea that's not actually, the goals and the means to those goals don't necessarily align. There's also a discrepancy between means and ends perpetrated by the class system in America, according to Merton, right? And Merton makes a pretty strong argument that it is a fiction that access to wealth is actually available to all. We tell everyone that that's true. We say access to wealth is available to everyone, but the reality is there is only so many dollars in America, right? That's just is what it is. There's, for easy math, we'll just say round numbers, there's $100 trillion in America, right? Everyone wants a piece of that $100 trillion. It's unrealistic to say everyone can be a millionaire when there's only $100 trillion in America, right? Eventually, some people are going to not have money. And so he makes this argument, and so he says this lack of access causes strain and therefore deviance to obtain wealth. And that's in large part because we keep telling everyone, oh, if you just work harder, you can get money. If you just try a little harder, you can get money. I can't remember, just recently, it was either in the Huffington Post or Forbes or one of those kind of publications that does kind of like pseudo business stuff, but it's also pretty heavily focused on celebrities, said that Kylie Jenner is the youngest self-made billionaire in America. And a lot of people took strong exception to that because Kylie Jenner is not what most people would consider or classify as self-made, right? She's the daughter of Bruce Jenner, an Olympian, or now Caitlyn Jenner, and Kris Jenner, who was married to Bob Kardashian, who was on OJ's defense team. She has her sisters, Kim, Khloe, and Kourtney, that are all very, very wealthy. And the Kardashian empire in general is a very, very expansive economic empire, right? Financially. And so to say she's a self-made billionaire, there's a suggestion that she started with nothing and built everything up on her own back. And it's like, well, you went to prep schools, you lived in a mansion in Malibu. Are you really that self-made, right? Yet, that's what people will point to, is they'll say stuff like, look at this self-made person. And Merton argues this lack of access actually causes strain because some people work really, really hard and continue to work really, really hard and bust their bums all day long and just never actually make it. And so they feel this strain because they're essentially being fed a lie that you could get wealthy, you could be better, you're just not working hard enough. And they're like, I'm working 80-hour weeks, I don't know how I could possibly work harder. So Merton also suggests that there are 5 main modes of adjustment to this anomie, right, or to this strain. When people experience strain in their lives, they react in one of 5 different ways, right? The first one is conformity. You just kind of accept that it is what it is. You need to go through conventional means to pro-social ends of wealth, all right? If I want to be wealthy, I'm just going to have to go to school, put myself through school if I can't afford it or my parents can't afford to cash flow it, go to medical school, become a doctor or something like that, and work hard and be successful that way. The second mode of adjustment is innovation. This is the most common deviant response. I promise you that will be an exam question, so make sure you know that innovation is the most common deviant response to strain according to Merton's strain theory. This accepts success as a goal, but the means may be illegitimate. And this was referenced on the last slide also. These are people like the Wolf of Wall Street and the Great Gatsby. People like the mob, right? We want to be rich. We want to be successful. We want to have a lot of money. We want to live the lifestyle. But if I have to do that by selling drugs, then I'm going to do that. In the case of the Great Gatsby, if I have to do that by bootlegging liquor, I'm going to do that. In the case of Wolf of Wall Street, if I have to do that by selling illegal stocks and bonds and doing some sketchy trade practices, I'm going to do that. Because at the end of the day, the thing that matters the most is that I become wealthy. It doesn't really matter whether I do it legitimately or not. I just need to be wealthy, right? And if you think about this in general, backing up for a second to society in general, and I know I've used the movie Titanic as an example, I think in just about every theory, right? But there even, if you recall in that movie, when Molly Brown, played by Kathy Bates, comes onto the boat, right? Rose introduces her to us as a narrator and stuff and says she's what Mother called new money, right? There's even, like within wealthy communities, there are different ideas about what is the cause of wealth or not, right? Kathy Bates was not born wealthy in that movie, or Molly Brown was not born wealthy. Her husband struck gold out west, hit a gold mine, became super wealthy, and so she started mingling with the upper classes of society because essentially you can buy your way in, right, if you have enough money. And they all said, though, that she was not quite proper enough, she was not quite refined enough because she was not born into it. Her husband happened upon it. And so she was not as accepted in the group amongst first-class people, even though there was no question she can sit with them at dinner, right? She can afford the nice dresses. She can afford the nice staterooms and stuff. She's certainly not third class like Jack was, right? She's certainly not that riffraff down below. But even within the upper class of society, she earned her money in an illegitimate way, and therefore there was something sketchy about that or something problematic about that. She was within a lower class, even amongst first class, right? And so in the example of Titanic, conformity would be people like, Rose and Cal and John Jacob Astor and Benjamin Guggenheim. At the time, Henry Flagler even would be considered someone who was very, very wealthy, right? And so his kids and stuff could ride in first class and be legitimate because he was some business owner and a big successful millionaire. Molly Brown, accepted success as a goal, but did so not necessarily in an illegitimate, illegal way, but did so by striking gold, not by being born into it. So the third deviant response, or the third response to strain, is rebellion, and this rejects the ends and the means of everything in society and advocates a violent overthrow. At the end of the day, basically, this is what communism is, right? We don't like a capitalistic society. Therefore, we need to get rid of the whole society and completely change our whole economic system to be communist, and the only way to do that is to completely overthrow everything in our society and pretty much start from scratch, which is pretty much what the Bolsheviks did in Russia in the late 19 teens, like 1919, 1920-ish period of time in Russian history. So there's retreatism, and this is kind of an escapist response, right? You also in retreatism kind of reject the ends and the means, but instead of advocating for a violent overthrow or anything else, you just kind of drop out of society, right? You get high all the time, you get drunk all the time, you do whatever it is that's your vice, and just kind of, you're just a surfer dude living on the beach, and if you're homeless, you're homeless. If you're not, you're not, because you're not going to participate in society at all, one way or the other. You're not going to commit crime, but you're certainly not going to do anything pro-social and just kind of exist. This is what retreatism is what a lot of people suggest is what's going on with millennials right now, right? You're just living in your parents' basement, playing video games all day. You haven't seen the sun in months, and you're certainly not a productive member of society in any capacity. And then there's ritualism. And in ritualism, this is kind of the hopelessness aspect within this all, right? You give up the struggle to get ahead, but you're still going to go accept conventional means, just you're not going to get to the end that you want. And so you just try and keep what you have. You try and hoard as much as you can, but you pretty much know that you're always going to be living maybe paycheck to paycheck, maybe a little bit better to paycheck, but you're fine, just renting an apartment your whole life. You're not going to buy a house. You're certainly not going to live on the beach. You're not going to drive a nice car. You're just going to kind of exist and just do your own thing and kind of fly under the radar and just kind of go through the ritual, go through the motions of working and trying to get ahead, but you're not really actively trying all that hard. For those of you who are athletes or who ever played on a sports team or even in band or choir or something like that, I'm sure you know people like this also. They were ritualistic, right? Everything outwardly says that they're trying at practice or at rehearsals. Everything says that they're doing their best, but pretty much the only time they pick up their instrument or kick a soccer ball or dribble a basketball is during practice. They're not doing any extra work outside of it. They're going to, during weights, during going to strength training and stuff, they're going to put weight on the bar, but it's not going to be much weight. They're going to do, 10 rounds or 10 reps of bench press, but they're not going to be struggling. If they break a sweat, it's a miracle. They're just kind of, going through the motions of life. So as previously stated, innovation is the most frequently adapted mode among members of the lower class as well, right? There's a strong desire to be wealthy and successful, but if you are a member of the lower class, you might not be able to afford college, right? You might not be able to afford a private school education. And so you're denied these conventional access, the conventional access to wealth, and so you have to kind of innovate new ways to become wealthy, right? In fact, a lot of people suggest that the reason why we have different types of music in American society even was through this kind of innovative response. Now, granted, this is not a deviant response, it's just coming up with a new method, right? Classical music was really, really big, but minorities couldn't really get into classical music all that much, and so they started developing like jazz and the blues, right? And then slowly white people said there's money to be made in jazz and the blues, so we're going to slowly creep in over there. And so then that's why, minorities, and specifically black people, came up with rap music, right? And then white people, we've got Eminem now and other white rappers that are slowly drifting into that society also, but they've essentially innovated new ways. I want to be a famous musician. I'm not going to get to be a famous musician. Like, society is not going to allow me to be a big band musician and be black, because especially back when in the 20s and 30s when big band music was really popular, America was very, very segregated, and so I need to come up with my own kind of music, make my own kind of culture, so that people want to buy my albums and listen to me perform, right? If you ever listen to Damon Johns from Shark Tank talk about why he created FUBU, right? FUBU stands for us, by us, right? I want to be in clothing. I'm not going to get into clothing selling suits and ties because white America does not want to buy a suit and tie from a black guy. So I'm going to attach myself to this new culture that's emerging, hip-hop culture, and develop clothes specifically for this new thing, right? They innovated a new idea when they made FUBU, right? And so there's a strong desire to be wealthy and successful, but you're denied those conventional access. You're denied the conventional ways to do it, right? Strain theory is widely accepted within a social disorganization framework, and it's used to help kind of define these delinquent subcultures. This culture in this area in particular has a high amount of strain. In fact, even if you look at the mob and the mafia, the reason why the mob, especially the Italian mobs, became so popular is because Italians and Irish people in America at the turn of the last century they were considered kind of less than adequate Europeans, right? They were not cultured, they were not sophisticated, they were not refined like the British and the French and the Germans were, right? They were Italians and they were Irish, so that was kind of gross, right? So what the mob did was came in and essentially offered a level of protection to Italian businesses and offer a level of safety and security for Italians in certain neighborhoods, right? And so, and even still, if you go to Little Italy in New York, right, or if you go to Chinatown in a lot of different big cities, those areas might have a delinquent subculture to an extent, but they're there to fight and protect. We're not able to have access to the normal ways to survive as a society in this city, so we're going to make our own rules. We're going to do our own thing. And it's okay if the mob comes in and takes a little bit off the top, because they're providing a service for us by keeping us safe and by keeping us happy. That's the same reason why gangs thrive in big cities also now. I mean, the mob was essentially a gang also, right? But now we call them street gangs as opposed to the mafia or anything else. But that's why we see gang problems in certain areas, right? In Chicago especially has a lot of gang violence, and it's because black people in Chicago were denied a lot of the conventional accesses to wealth and denied a lot of the things that most white people in Chicago had. And so this subculture developed where they said, okay, if we don't protect ourselves, the police aren't going to protect us, the police aren't looking out for us, business doesn't help us out, all the white people here don't want to serve us, let's make our own stuff then. They don't deserve our money, they don't get our benefits, and so, the benefit of our services and stuff, and so they've developed and innovated new ways to achieve that dream of wealth and success. So, anyway, that's all I've got for you today. And as always, if you have any questions, let me know.